in extra time. Mark, let's bring you on, because if we're talking about who controls the power base, is it the politicians or is it organizations such as Bilderberg?
Well, Bilderberg has a way of sounding like old hat sometimes, Brian, but it keeps on ticking. They took off 2 years, allegedly, for COVID, 2020 and 2021. They may have had smaller breakout sessions or internet sessions at that time. But anyway, they're back with a vengeance. The 70th meeting in 70 years, as I've mentioned recently. And on this slide, it just gives the basics. They finally released their own press release, even though we had a good tip that they were meeting in Madrid, Spain, but they didn't release it until the first day of their meeting. They're just so open on the 30th of May. And it says here, the key topics for the discussion this year, and I gave the official website of the Bilderbergmeetings.org that has been in existence for the better part of 20 years. Another time that they claim that they're so magnanimous and open and into transparency. But here are the 13 topics: the state of AI, AI safety, changing faces of biology, climate, future of warfare, geopolitical landscape, Europe's economic challenges, U.S. economic challenges, U.S. political landscape, i.e. they don't want Trump in there, among other things, Ukraine and the world, roll that off your tongue, Middle East, China, and Russia, some very common topics there. And that, in fact, is a theme to think about. Some of these topics are long-term. It's not just flash in the pan. This is something I won't read in its entirety. It's the typical brush-off statement that the Bilderberg anonymous media department, whose media department has no people that they name, and they don't even give a letterhead or a physical address. Again, more of their transparency. But they were founded in 1954, and they were seeded with CIA money. I've mentioned that before. A UK professor, Richard Aldrich of Warwick, has confirmed that CIA money started Bilderberg. Anyway, they mentioned, of course, that the meetings are held under the Chatham House rule, which states that participants are free to use the information received, but neither the identity nor the affiliation of the speaker or speakers nor any other participant may be revealed. In other words, who talks about what can't be talked about. And as these ideas and projects kind of work their way through society, no one will really know from whom or whence they came. So it kind of provides a cloaking for what they do. But anyway, moving on here in this next slide, I call it the Bilderberg continuum. And what's important here, Brian, is that a lot of people get the idea that Bilderberg is flash in the pan, always on top of the latest topics. But in fact, they stay with key topics and have for several years. And this belies the argument that they just go there to have a retreat and take off their jackets, loosen their ties, have some caviar, and just vent their concerns, for the betterment of international relations. And they even make that claim by registering as a charity, the Bilderberg Association in the UK, that charity, and the American Friends of Bilderberg in the state of New York, another registered charity. At any rate, AI, as my self-made chart shows here, Brian, AI has been discussed 2013, it appears so. That's way back in the UK when they met at Watford, 2015, 2018, 2019, 2023, and this year. Russia, 8 times, 2015 in Austria, and all the way through to this year, 2024 in Madrid, Spain. China, at least six times, as far back as 2011 in Switzerland. And then these other years I show here, 2017, 19, 22, 23, and 24. Ukraine, 2014, when Bilderberg met in Denmark. And of course, that's the year that the Russian-leaning government of Ukraine was overthrown by Western insiders, including Victoria Nuland, who can be traced to Bilderberg directly and indirectly. Then also in 2022, 23, and this year, disinformation, evidently in Virginia in 2017, Italy 2018, Switzerland 2019, and Washington, D.C. a couple years ago. And pharma medical issues, Spain as far back as 2010 when I started covering Bilderberg for Jim Tucker, UK 2013, DC 2022, and Spain 2023. So you see they hang on to these issues a long time, which clearly suggests that they're nurturing and building on what they discussed the year before. So these are not just offhand, have a retreat, loosen your tie kind of discussions. Anyway, another one of the topics one of the topics of the 13 this year is Middle East, as I indicate in this slide. And that can be traced most clearly, at least, to Sigrid Kaag or Kaag. I'm not sure how you'd pronounce her last name. Sigrid Kaag, I'll say. Cog in the wheel, right? A Dutch diplomat and politician serving as Minister of Finance and first Deputy Prime Minister in the fourth Mark Rutte cabinet. And that would be the Netherlands. And she's Senior Humanitarian and Reconstruction Coordinator for Gaza through the UN. So curiously, there's a Gaza concern among Bilderbergers this year in Madrid. And it's interesting to note that rarely, if ever, do you see an Israeli official at Bilderberg. And I can't quite fully explain why. So what position they're taking on Gaza, I don't know, Brian. It's curious that the WHO, for all its faults and schemes that we find very underhanded, the World Health Organization actually has done some admirable, laudable work trying to help the people of Gaza. So is Bilderberg feeling a humanitarian impulse toward Gaza? We'll find out soon enough. Anyway, in this next slide, another Bilderberg topic. I'm just kind of hitting on some highlights. There'll be more in-depth reports coming up about certain aspects of Bilderberg that I'll be writing and reporting about. But of course, the changing faces of biology concerns Mr. Albert Bourla, the chairman of the pharma colossus Pfizer. And Bourla has been to Bilderberg, I'm going to say 3 times now. It's at least twice, but I believe 3 times, Brian. And we'll move on from there, kind of given an overall framework here. Another person pertaining to the current Bilderberg topic, the changing faces of biology, is clearly Dr. Pamela Rendi-Wagner, nominated the new director of the European version of the Centers for Disease Control. And on 20 of February 2024, she was nominated to be the director of the European Centers for Disease Control for a 5-year period. So she was at Bilderberg too, along with Albert Bourla and others who have an interest in big pharma. And moving on here, Brian, this is an important aspect. I would contend, and I've covered Bilderberg and analyzed them quite a bit, I would contend that if it was only the private sector, Shell Oil, and Diane mentioned Shell with regards to Fox Facts. Royal Dutch Shell has been a strong underpinning of Bilderberg for many, many years. That's worth noting. But if it were Shell Oil, even Pfizer, various private concerns, if they were meeting to talk about their stocks, to talk about their financial fortunes, without government officials there and without the media there, you might argue, well, they can have their country club meetings and sip their caviar and do what it is they do. But the problem is breaking the public trust. And I mentioned in this slide, I don't necessarily need to go through all of it, but the government people there are about 35 of 131 attendees this year in Spain, Brian. That's about 26%. So a full 1/4 of those there are mainly current serving government officials, a few former ones. And I'll mention as a quick footnote, and this is curious, I looked twice, I'll look again, but I'm pretty sure there are no UK currently sitting government officials at Bilderberg this year. I don't believe there were any. There were former ones like John Sowers, who's with Newberg, and he used to be MI6. But there doesn't, and he's associated with the Bilderberg Association charity, but there appeared to have been no sitting British officials there this year, which is curious. But some of those who were there this year from government, Radoslaw Sikorski, Polish Foreign Affairs Minister, Tarun Chabra, the Senior Director for Technology and National Security of the U.S. National Security Council, Adelaide Adeyemo, Spain's Foreign Affairs Minister, the U.S. Deputy Treasury Secretary is Adelaide Adeyemo, and then Spain's Foreign Affairs Minister, Jose Albares. And then some of the media, we have Anne Applebaum of The Atlantic. Of course, we have Gideon Rahman of the Financial Times, the chief foreign affairs commentator, Matthias Döpfner, the chair and CEO of Axel Springer. He's notable because last year, working with Zanny Mittenbetters of The Economist, who of course was there this year as well, they announced through The Economist that Axel Springer was going to make a major foray into the U.S. media market. But the media, they sell out their ethics at the door of Bilderberg, just as government officials cannot claim that they can jettison or get rid of their government officials, a government title or government duties, that is. They can't just leave that at the door and go break bread with these privateers. That's an absolute breaking of the public trust, as it is with the media. And here in this next slide, I'll just mention in passing, I'm looking at something called Bilderberg Channels, and this is U.S. Army General retired David Petraeus, former CIA director and a frequent Bilderberg attendee. For the last 10 or 11 years, he's been assigned to a key Bilderberg post, that is KKR Global Institute. And the founder of KKR, Henry Kravis, is the husband of Bilderberg Steering Committee co-chair Marie Kravis, who also has the American Friends of Bilderberg charity. So we'll be looking at Mr. Petraeus, Brian, in some future reports very soon, both on the screen and in the written word by me. I'll be looking at this more closely, the real reason why KKR wants Petraeus on call. And I argue, and Forbes kind of suggests at least, that Petraeus's connections, and I would say including the one through Bilderberg especially, are what really give KKR an edge in hiring him, Petraeus, to head that KKR Global Institute. So Petraeus's Bilderberg connections make him very handy and useful for that private equity firm, KKR, which is among the world's most powerful equity firms. And then these last couple slides are articles I did on Bilderberg, Brian. This one last year in August, Bilderberg Beyond the Meetings, Part 1. I'm looking at doing Part 2 pretty soon, which will take into account not only this year's meeting, but looking beyond just the phenomenon of the annual meetings. And back about several years ago, I did one other one, and we can show that slide, and I can conclude. A Bilderberger in Action, Joseph Ackerman, a German-born banker, and he took over Cyprus some years ago. I wrote this article in 2015 when Cyprus had its financial woes, and he became the virtual economic viceroy of Cyprus. So it's interesting when Bilderbergers enter into action, and that's what we'll be looking at, Brian, in my future reports and that second installment I plan on writing, to look beyond just the annual meetings and really get into the nitty-gritty as to where these channels go. So over to you.
Mark, thank you very much. Well, we're looking at the power base, which, in my opinion, certainly ultimately controls politics, and we need to do much more of this. Who are these people? Who are the authorities they work with, or the organizations, and what's their true agenda? Well,